Back again with another episode of Altitude Advantage. As we count down the days of training camp, we've been keeping you covered here on the podcast with short, bite-sizable content for you guys to listen to as we gear up. It's crazy that we're getting closer and closer to the start of training camp, and we talked about the position battles on the defensive side, but now it's time to look at the offensive side and the position battles that we see there, in particular in the wide receiver and running back room. Now, I know, you already know, I'm a big fan of the defense, but something about the position battles on the offensive side, I'm really excited to watch because I think it's gonna be very competitive, and I think we're really gonna see how this team can elevate as we go into the 2025 season.
Yeah, absolutely. And, training camp is a week away. I'm excited to have everybody back here, get going. We're almost ready to go. Yeah. But, yeah, I think let's start with the wide receiver position because I think there's two elements to this. One is I think there's a number of guys that in my mind are, in line to be on this team, to have roles on this team. And I think for them, whether that's a guy like Marvin Mims, Troy Franklin, Devon Vele, Pat Bryant, Cortland Sutton, right? And I've just named a lot of guys there, and I'm not leaving anybody out, but this is going to be
in no particular order,
right? Cortland Sutton, this is not going to be an easy place to make the roster, an easy group to find a spot. But I think it starts with, and we mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, what does that rotation look like for those guys? And we know Sean Payton likes to use a lot of different personnel groupings. We know that the Broncos want to get the run game going. We'll talk about that in a second, but there's going to be carries. There's going to be targets to Evan Ingram, who is a potential joker for this Broncos offense, right? And so then if you're Cortland, Marvin, Troy, Pat Bryant, Devon Vele, Trent Sherfield, I could go on and on. How many snaps are you getting? How many targets are you getting? And I think both in training camp and the preseason, and I said this a couple of weeks ago, I think to some degree it's going to be week to week in terms of game plan and how can we attack this defense. And maybe it's a week where Sutton gets 10, 11, 12 targets, or maybe it's a week where you go deep to Mims and Franklin a couple times, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's going to depend week to week how that happens. But I want to start off there that you have these talented guys in Sutton and Mims, a rookie in Pat Bryant that he's not comparing him to Michael Thomas, but said he has traits that remind him of Michael Thomas. Sean Payton said that. That
holds weight in a sense of just, I feel like this coaching staff is really good at seeing potential. So when you're able to kind of call that out, to your point, you're not saying he's going to be that guy, but it does hold weight for me to being the fact that you can see some traits of that is going to be very exciting to see how that plays out.
Absolutely. And, I do think that based on what I saw in the offseason program, I can't wait to see Pat Bryant in action, right? Because he, big body receiver, made plays in traffic. And then there's kind of this group of other guys that, there's some young players, Kyrius White, Jerron Newton, Courtney Jackson, Joaquin Davis. I could go on and on in terms of, A.T. Perry, who Sean Payton said might miss a week or so of training camp with an injury. But other than that, you've got these young guys that are going to push for a spot. And you got Michael Bandy, who we know has been on the practice squad the last several years. He's a guy that obviously the Broncos seem to trust and that they've brought him up at times from the practice squad. And so you look at all these players and it's just going to be interesting to see, okay, well, who can compete for roles on the offense, right? And then can any of these other guys kind of push for a roster spot? Or, it's also who can earn a practice squad spot and kind of be available if you need them during the season, or, continue the development. And so it's about more than just kind of that 53 spot, right? To me, it's more about roles and kind of who can be developed, who's got potential here. Yeah. I think the big thing for all the receivers is that it's a benefit that Bo Nix is in place. And that a year ago, the Broncos were rotating quarterbacks at this time, even into the second week of training camp. We got to the point where it's Jarrett Stidham and Bo Nix going back and forth before they eventually named Bo Nix the starter, which I believe happened after joint practice, if I'm remembering correctly. Mm-hmm. But there's going to be a consistency there that, Bo Nix can develop a rapport with Pat Bryant or Michael Bandy or Troy Franklin or Marvin Mims or, Trent Sherfield or Cortland Sutton, whoever it is, they're getting the reps with the guy they're going to play with. And so excited to see the receiver position. But I think for me, it's less about ooh, this is going to be X player versus X player. It's more about like who's going to get the, or how do you prepare these guys for weeks where it's got to be Cortland this week, or it's got to be Mims this week, or it's got to be somebody else. Like, that's more what it's about for me at the receiver position.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you've talked about before is just go where you're needed, right? And kind of that mindset of what this room can kind of bring. And we know that Cortland Sutton is the leader of that room. He's that anchor point. We talked a little bit about that during the discussion about the position battle on the defensive side, which if you missed that, make sure you guys go back and listen. But when you look at just the range of talent that you have, the coaching staff has mentioned it before on other positions too, where there's like, it's a good problem to have, right? Like, you don't want to lack talent or lack depth in certain areas. That's a problem you want to have, especially going into training camp. Obviously, we know that certain cuts come and all that stuff, but it's a good thing to have and evaluate the best talent out there. And I think that they've been able to bring guys in that are going to push each other, that are going to motivate each other. And when you have a guy like Mims, you see the versatility of what your skill set can do too, right? And that's good for a Pat Bryant to come in and kind of see like, okay, if I can contribute here because, X, Y, and Z has this covered, where can I show my talent and where can I show that I can make an impact on this team? Whether that is on practice squad or special teams or, again, actually like on the field. So when you look at Mims in particular, I saw this stat that PFF ranked the 2024's top wide receivers by separation type, and Marvin Mims finished number 1 because he's just able to create that space in between. And we saw that. And he doesn't need that much space, 2 to 3 yards if you have separation, and he's gone. And I think when you have that developing into what can be for next season, I feel like that's interesting to watch. To your point, it's not this guy against this guy, but just how can this grow to make this offensive scary, especially with a year 2 Bo Nix that has a full offseason under his belt as the number 1 guy, getting those first team reps the entire time. That's really going to add to the value, and that's going to push these receivers to the next level. Yeah,
absolutely. And again, I think it's all about how do you earn a role, right? And maybe for me, less about who makes it, and you never know. There's always a surprise, but it does feel like there's some established guys, and so who is going to be that go-to guy, or who are going to be the top 2 or 3 options? How does Evan Ingram work in that mix?
Yeah.
All that matters. That, to me, is very different than the running back position, right?
Yes.
I think that the running back battle is, and Sean Payton said at the end of the offseason program, don't start counting running backs yet. Don't try to figure out the rotation. It's going to reveal itself as we go along, who deserves a role, who deserves to be on this roster, who's going to make the team. But listen, there are currently 6 running backs on this roster in Tyler Bidet, J.K. Dobbins, Audric Estime, Jaleel McLaughlin, Blake Watson, and R.J. Harvey. And it's just math, right? Like, there's not room for 6 guys on the active roster. And you're also, that's, if you keep a fullback, then maybe that impacts how many guys you keep. But I would think, you keep 3 or 4 running backs, right? And so how does that work out? And I'm not going to project anything now because I truly don't know what this is all going to look like. Certainly R.J. Harvey, I think, has been everything that the Broncos hoped he would be based on what I've seen, the explosiveness, the vision, the burst off the line. It feels like he's always 2 or 3 yards off the line of scrimmage by the time, like, the first swarm gets there. And so if you can be already 2 yards beyond the line of scrimmage before contact, and you've got an offensive line that ranked near the top of the league in run blocking last year, that's a good combination, and I feel like can really lend itself to R.J. Harvey in this running game having success. J.K. Dobbins, obviously the Broncos signed him late in the offseason program, 905 yards, 9 touchdowns in less than 200 attempts last year in 13 games. He struggled with injuries a little bit, and again, knock on wood, he can stay healthy. I think he talked about the medical staff being part of the appeal in terms of coming to Denver, but he's an explosive player in his own right if he can stay healthy and be out there for the Broncos, and it'll be interesting to see kind of what his role is. And then from there, it's, again, like, there's a bunch of guys here that have done it in the league to some extent. Jaleel McLaughlin, we know, third-year player. He was really explosive his rookie year. I think there was a quote from him in the Denver Post that maybe he didn't feel like he had the season he wanted to a year ago, but he's still, last year, 496 yards and just 1 touchdown. But he was a guy that especially as a rookie, had some juice, had some burst. So
he's like your change of pace guy. Like he finds a way to
exactly.
Just,
And in the passing game, we know he wants to be involved. You've got Aric Estime, a 5th-round pick from a year ago, who had 310 yards and 2 touchdowns as a rookie. Tyler Bidet had very limited action. He was in the playoff game, active for that after coming back off IR. Didn't get any work really, but it was in that game in Tampa where he showed his ability to make some big plays. And then Blake Watson, another guy who undrafted this time a year ago. A lot of people were buzzing about Blake Watson. I think our friend Steve Atwater was really high on him. And, maybe he puts it together here going into year 2. So that to me is like, it's a good problem to have good players, and especially at the running back position, a lot of young players I think is helpful. Having J.K. Dobbins in that room is important from a veteran standpoint, I think. But
he spoke on that too.
Exactly. But like outside of Dobbins and Harvey, like you could really tell me it's any combination, and I could believe you that
could work.
It's going to play out that way just because these guys are all going to go out there and push it and try their very best. And when pads come on, I think we'll start to see what that looks like. We'll see it in the preseason games. And I think an element to consider, too, is like, how do these guys complement each other? Like, it's not – and maybe they just pick the 4 best football players or however many, 3 best, whatever. But, like, maybe there's a little bit of, okay, well – Harvey has this sort of style and Dobbins has this sort of style. So maybe player X, makes the most sense to kind of pair with them. And so that adds another layer to it. But I think what's fun about the running back position is you're going to see it play out on the field, right? You're going to know based on who's breaking tackles, who's running through dudes, who's holding onto the football, who's, protecting in the passing game. We know pass protection is a big part of this. And then, you kind of just go from there and see like how does it all play out? And it would not surprise me, Elisa, if we see a lot of rushing attempts in the preseason to kind of figure out what the rotation's going to be, who this guy's going to be. Yeah. And then part of it too is like roster mechanics of, okay, maybe you want to keep 4 or 5 of these guys who can make it to the practice squad versus who can't, right? And so there'll just be some interesting elements there, but I'm excited to see that. To me, we talked last week about corner, about safety. We talked earlier about wide receiver. This is the one to watch, right? Because I think everywhere else, you at least have a general sense of like how everything's going to play out. Generally, who is going to start, or
you have your anchor points.
Yeah, this one, like, there's potential there and there's talent, but like, I don't know how it's all going to play out. So I'm this one, what I say, we're a week away. We're probably a couple weeks away from knowing how this starts to play out, because you got to get pads on, got to get acclimated, got to start, getting to the preseason games. But when we get there, I'm excited to see these guys run. Yeah, and one of the things that really caught my attention when J.K. Dobbins signed with the Broncos was you would think that a crowded running back room will want someone to go elsewhere, but Dobbins had mentioned like that's one of the things that also brought him to this team, on top of other things like the coaching staff and health and all those things. But he talked about just how impressive this running back room is and how competitive it is, and what he's seen just in his short time during minicamp. And that veteran presence is important, but it's also just something about getting fresh new blood in here, getting an infusion that just kind of gets the guys like, okay, like I want to do this better. I want to focus on this. And Jaleel McLaughlin had spoken about that again to the Denver Post, mentioning how he's really taking no days off because he really wants to make sure that he's putting all the work in that he sees his other teammates and other position groups putting that work in, and wanting to take not only his game to the next level, but the running game of this team to the next level. And that was something that was struggled on the Broncos last season. And I think when you look at how they wanted to be better on third downs and things like that, you're able to help out Bo Nix when you have a good running game. Sean Payton mentioned that. So I think this is a very crucial position battle that we're going to see in training camp, because if you lock this in the way that you locked in your franchise quarterback, Broncos are going to be, a little dangerous there. Yeah, I agree with you there. I think that this is, and listen, it makes sense, right? You need a good running game, but especially when you get to the playoffs and like controlling time of possession and like, can you keep Patrick Mahomes off the field? Can you keep Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson,
send those drives,
Joe Burrow, whoever it is? Like, can you keep those guys off the field? The running game matters. Can you convert on third down? And like, I think back to that Bengals game of like early in the first half, the Bengals, I felt like had a little bit of success with the run game, and then you're in 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3 instead of 3rd and 8. That'll help Bo Nix out. In the red zone, if you can rush it in, like you said, Sean Payton mentioned that as a key to red zone production. A good running game, like you said, could be the key to kind of unlock another jump from the Broncos offense. So the results of this position battle are going to be really important.
Yeah, in Broncos country, we cannot wait to see it all play out. And just a reminder, there'll be 13 open practices during training camp. The first open practice is July 25th. So write that down, circle it. And while you're doing that, make sure you also comment below on what position battle you're looking forward to on the offensive side. And we've kept you covered as we count down to training camp. Next week, we'll be back with even more as things get underway. But make sure you guys take a listen, go back so you guys are all prepped and ready as we kick off training camp. So once again, I am your host and team reporter, Elisa Hernandez, across the table from our lead writer on DenverBroncos.com, Aric DiLalla. We have you covered on the latest. Make sure you guys check us out and listen to all the latest podcasts on Altitude Advantage and DenverBroncos.com.